everyone, welcome to Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world who wish to pursue their career in art. I'm your host Niharika, and on this show you will hear artists talk about their lives and the choices they had to make in pursuit of arts. We will also get to use some tips and key learnings from the lives of these artists, along with a detailed discussion on their areas of interest. So quickly hop onto a journey into the world of arts along with us. Today's guest is Sreelekshmi. Sreelekshmi is a dance practitioner and graduate of Lady Shri Ram College for Women, Delhi University, and is currently pursuing her Masters in Performance Studies in Ambedkar University, Delhi. She is a Ministry of Culture CCRT scholarship holder and a Doordarshan graded artist in the field of Mohini'attam. Sreelekshmi started her dance training under Sudha Peethambaran at the age of 5 in Kerala. She started with the forms of Bharatanatyam, Mohini'attam. She later joined Geetha Padmakumar for training in Kuchipudi. After moving to Delhi, Sreelekshmi further explored the Sopanam repertoire of Mohini'attam, which was pioneered by theatre practitioner Kavalam Narayana Panicker under Jayaprabha Menon at the International Academy of Mohiniyattam, Delhi, and has traveled for various productions and programs such as Nishagandhi Festival, Kerala, Philippine International Dance Festival and Workshop 2017, Konark Festival, Delhi International Arts Festival 2017, Hampi Festival, and so on. Exploring the notion of performance in Ambedkar University paved ways for Sreelekshmi to question her practice and specifically problematize the space of classical. Body is a major space of conflict that she has tried to converse with. Some of the major issues and processes for her practice are the politics of the figure of the performer in costuming, in gender performance, the space of the performance, and in body movements, to name a few. She is currently self-training her body in Mohini'attam in reading and decoding the performance tradition. She has currently restarted her training in Kuchipudi with Geetha Padmakumar and is also learning Kalaripayattu from Mr. Arvind in Kerala. Hi, Sreelekshmi. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of our show.
Thank you, Niharika, and I'm really glad to be a part of the podcast series. And thank you for inviting me, having me here today.
This is exciting. Sreelekshmi, tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you get started with the entire idea of dancing, and where did you get your inspiration from, and what has your journey been so far?
So I was born and brought up in Kerala, and there was no specific inspiration to start dancing. I have a mother who's very much interested in dancing and who is always ready to put in the right, needed requirements for a student to pursue dancing. And it's only because of her that I started dancing. And my training and my exposure and my experience in dancing, all of it starts in Kerala. I started my training at the age of 5, as you mentioned, under my teacher, Srimati Sudha Peethambaran. And the dance school was also very nearby, near to where I'm staying. I started with the form of Bharatanatyam, and then later on moved to the form of Mohini'attam, and then also pursued Kuchipudi. All three, I was initiated into all three forms by Sudha teacher. And later on, after a few years, I could also start further learning Kuchipudi under Srimati Geetha Padmakumar, also in Kerala. So this is how my training began and how I started dancing.
That is very interesting. So tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind all of this. I mean, you must have had that one moment when you were a child or, as you were growing up, because you continue to associate yourself with dance, which means that there's something about dance and movement that has really, piqued your interest or has made you curious and wanted to make you feel stuck to it. So what is that one inspiration behind being with dance for all this while?
Like in Kerala, there is a system of Kalotsavam, which is the school competitions that happen. And the extracurricular aspect has a lot to do with the assessment of the child, and the process of how the child interacts with so many forms, right from school level. So I think the school part of it is something which kept me going, or which kept me closer to the idea of performing, whatever it is. I mean, I'm not just speaking specifically about everybody interested in dancing, but be it whatever, as we call it, extracurricular, people, their exposure and interest in it also comes through this lens of the school education system. And otherwise, in relation to my own specific training in the three forms, that is something I would say that, it did not come to me as me sitting and getting inspired, or me having a thoughtful process for me to sit and choose that I have to learn Mohiniyattam next, or I have to learn Kuchipudi next. Rather, this is also something which is very specific to the dance education system in Kerala, which I have personally seen and experienced and heard about. That in most of the dance classes, when the student is exposed to the initial form of Bharatanatyam, after the first or maybe 1-2 years of training, or after the first performance in Bharatanatyam, the student is also, as we say, naturally taught Mohini'attam next, is initiated into Mohini'attam by the teacher. And similar process with Mohini'attam. After 1-2 years of training, or after the initial performance of Mohini'attam, then the student is also exposed to Kuchipudi. So then the training of these three forms happen simultaneously to that body of the student. So this is rather the dance education institution rather than the student, sitting and inspiring to choose. So for me, the idea was to learn dancing, and this was something the dance education system provided me. So it was more of that way that it came to me.
That is actually very interesting. Something, something worth talking about here is that the dance education system in Kerala seems to be quite further on compared to the rest of the country. In the sense, the idea of delivering or giving the students the opportunity of exposing themselves to various dance forms and then figuring out which one they want to probably continue pursuing or continue to stay with, is actually quite interesting, because if at all it is given at such a young age, the student gets an opportunity to actually decide what it is that they want to do in life, rather than having to go through the struggle of figuring out where to find the time to include it in their timeline, in their everyday lifestyle. So yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. I have a lot more questions about the education system, which I'll probably get to at a later stage. But you have talked about learning so many art forms, right? You've talked about learning Bharatanatyam, Mohini'attam, Kuchipudi. So tell us a little bit about how that has also shaped your understanding of what dance and movement is all about, and what does it actually mean to dance or to move, according to you?
What inspired me or what kept me going in dance class was, the three forms, as I was saying, and three forms with its own differences, and with its own grammar speaking to my body in a very different sense. And each form spoke something different. So Bharatanatyam was something which I have always found difficult to dance to, and maybe as a child I did mostly Bharatanatyam in schools. I think that was also because in schools, Bharatanatyam was a form which children got really excited about and all that. And naturally, maybe I did Bharatanatyam more in schools, like as a child. But I have always found it difficult for my body to communicate with Bharatanatyam. But that was not the case with Mohini'attam. Mohini'attam was something which came, even friendlier to my body. Maybe because of its lasya elements, maybe because of its swaying movements. So there was a lot of comfort and a lot of lightness that I could attach and find in the form of Mohini'attam, within the grammar of Mohini'attam. And similarly with Kuchipudi, which came later on. Kuchipudi was a form which is a form which speaks a lot of energy, and it has a lot of excitement in it, and has a lot of theatrical elements to it, considering the history of the form, which is also derived from street theater format. So currently, I feel Mohiniyattam and Kuchipudi are those two forms which I really hold closer. And I could also relate to how when I moved to Delhi from Kerala, Mohini'attam, I think, started sticking closer to my body. Maybe also because it reminded me of a sense of home, because Kerala is a form originated in Kerala. Mohini'attam is a form which originated in Kerala. Maybe it spoke to me so much of the memories of home, so much of the landscapes of home, the language Malayalam used in the format of Mohini'attam. So I think in that manner, my body found a real good comfort in all its movements and the grammar of Mohini'attam. So yeah, that was my experience with the forms.
There's something very interesting that you talk about, which I don't necessarily think that people mention or talk about, is the idea of associating yourself with a kind of dance form. Of course, we choose a dance form based on our likeness and our, inclination towards movement and, our relationship with movement and stuff. But nobody ever actually mentions it or articulates it. The idea of how it feels in the body, how does my body relate to the kind of movements that are presented to you through the art form. So that was actually a very interesting lens to talk about, and also something that's worth thinking about if you are looking to continue dancing in your own respective spaces, whether that kind of dance form speaks to you, whether it's something that feels very effortful, although you do love dancing. So maybe it's time to sort of open yourselves up to different dance forms and see which one is the one that actually speaks to you the most. This is where the idea of exposure and understanding what your body needs comes into picture. It's very important for you to expose yourselves to various dance forms to figure out which one seems to be the one that draws you closer to form positive relations with your body, rather than making you feel like you're stepping out of your comfort zones to do something which you're not probably feeling like doing. So thank you so much for putting that out there. During the entire conversation that you've been having so far, you do talk a lot about the Kerala education system and how it's supported you, and how there's a lot in it that you have benefited from. This is something that I would like to research on, so I'll get in touch with you about it off the record, and probably you and I can talk further about it. But for the moment, something very interesting that you and I talked about off before is that you've also had a lot of questions that you've developed and sort of recognized that you have, and somehow in the process of trying to figure out what the movement is, what the dance form is, how you're associated to it, you've also found yourself trying to answer or get answers to some of these questions. Can you tell us a little bit maybe what these questions are, and what it is that you've been trying to do in order to get some answers out of it?
Yeah. So I think it's very important for one to question our own practices or our own methods of learning and education, specifically in art practice. And, that is also something dance, I have seen, dance education system mostly doesn't provide the student, of how to locate dance in a very sociological sense. And for me also, that has been the case. I was not trained to question my art practice critically, but I had questions, and it was always uncomfortable for me to step out and talk to people about it, ask questions. But while having conversations, I think most of it was also a result of a university education system exposure that I got to. And that was one thing that kept on pushing me to talk further, to write further, to keep on questioning. And thankfully, I also got to know about some dancers, young dancers and artists who are questioning through, sometimes through their social media posts, sometimes through writing articles. So I think there were people around me, thankfully, to whom I could always look up to. And that has definitely provided me a strength and courage to go and talk about what my personal issues with dance were. I think I started questioning, and this has primarily a lot of influence of the lockdown time, when I noticed that dance was located within the personal space of the performer, and because of the pandemic, one couldn't step out of their personal spaces. So the space of performing, the space where one located dance was rather our own interior spaces, wherever it is, in with our everyday existence. And what I saw hugely problematic was that so many artists, so many critics who are very acknowledged and well positioned, them coming up and saying and writing about young dancers choosing to dance in their personal spaces, creating a category as that is a bad space or that is a good space to dance. And here again, we see the culture of how classical dances have always been there to purify certain things, to create hierarchies for dancers to have a space or not, considering what space they chose to perform in. And for me, that was hugely problematic. And for me, that showed reflected a lot of class element attached to the classical, like it always has been. So it should be like if I want to locate my dance on my terrace, and if I want to dance on my terrace, that should be very much okay. And if I want to have a backdrop, if I want to have a curtain behind me, that also must be okay. I think the individual existence and subjectivity of the performer should be given an importance, and a hierarchy and restriction should not be something that should be created. And this is where I started conversing. This was one major issue that struck me personally, which I felt the need to converse about. And another thing which I have personally felt, the need to talk about was that in graduation, when I was exposed to literature, you also deal with, study fields like feminism and politics. And it was as if you can talk about feminism, one can talk about body politics and body shaming everywhere, but once it entered the field of dance, all this was to be kept outside. It was as if nothing affected the space of dance. We were not allowed to speak anything, or as if there were no problems in the field of dance. But I think nobody can deny that the body shaming aspect of it is very much persistent in the field of dance. And that's very much visible in, I'm not kidding, if we look online, the kind of articles where critiques come up and write about performances as this dancer has worked on a trimmer body this time, hence the performance looked better. So I think that speaks a lot about the kind of body shaming and the body politics, and the creation of a certain body ideal for the dancer, which is hugely problematic. So this was also another aspect where I started speaking because it affected me very much personally. And I would say these conversations, as much as it is important, sometimes for me, I could find a lot of comfort. As I was mentioning, conversing with young dancers, seeing posts from other dancers who could openly speak up about their issues in dancing. And at the same time, it was also very uncomfortable. And I think I completely understand that discomfort in questioning and speaking about all these as well, because I think that has a lot to do with the dance education system that's being fed on our bodies.
You've spoken about a lot, many things that are, concerns across the, across, I think, genres of dance and not specific to one. One thing that I really found interesting in the conversation that you had with me was the idea of space. Why did it strike me as interesting is also because ever since the lockdown happened, it has definitely pushed all of the dancers to try and find a space to perform from or perform in. So I saying that Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, Odissi, or whatever a classical dance form cannot be performed in your personal space and then has to only be put on a stage like setup, then makes you question whether it's something that will last longer, because at the rate at which we are going, the pandemic doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, with so many variants coming up, and the risk of being exposed and constantly contracting COVID being there. So how do you negotiate? Like, there is this negotiation that needs to happen between what is deemed as classical, what are the rules and what are the things that the classical needs to uphold, versus what the reality on the ground is. If you say that you can't perform or you can't present a piece from your personal space, are you saying that we completely ditch dancing? Because that is not an option either. You perform not just for yourself, but sometimes even for your audience members. And the idea of audience also has shifted now. Something from live to doing something online. Even online live is a very different meaning now. You can't interact, you can't see them. It's just a virtual space. You're hoping that people are actually watching you perform. You only see a number at the top of your screen that says, oh my God, there are 400 people watching a performance as you speak right now, or as you present it. So this whole idea of what was okay for dance to be performed as, or where it was allowed to perform, has now changed completely because of the dynamics that COVID has presented us with. So it's a very interesting conversation, and something worth thinking about for all the dancers out there, including and not limited to classical. I mean, every dancer out there is struggling with this. I've seen slowly that dancers are going out there and trying to get into their studio spaces to get the open area and dance and practice, but that is also very limited. Like, you go once a week and then you go the next week, unlike what you used to do before, which is like 7 days a week and spending 3 to 4 hours in that space, which is not the case anymore. So I think the idea of space and negotiating is something that's definitely worth thinking about, specifically keeping the COVID times in mind and looking at whether we can find a space or an area where we can negotiate these terms and come up to an understanding where it's more flexible rather than kept in on locked in for only some sort to be performed in certain spaces, because I think that would reduce the opportunities that dance has to to spread out and present itself as an opportunity to learn and express through, which is a big concern and definitely worth thinking about. So anybody who's listening in, please think about this. Look at how you are negotiating with it. What are your thoughts on it? Feel free to drop in as comments, and let's see where the conversation goes from there. On this note, you have definitely posed a lot of interesting things to me, but I remember you also saying that you've had conversations about these questions with different kinds of people, not just the dancers who are encouraging and who also have similar mindsets, but also with people who've not probably, who don't really, sink in with the same thought and who don't think the way that you do. What has your experience been like when talking to such people?
I think one way to look at it would be the idea of tradition. That anything coming under the idea of tradition would, if we want to talk about it or if we want to question it, it becomes hugely problematic. And one very closely related term would be the idea of institutionalization, because all these forms went through an institutionalization over the years. Questioning my practice would mean that I'm also questioning the institution. So that notion would be very uncomfortable for some dancers, and hence these questions won't be encouraged. That is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be, again, considering the dance education system, as we call it, the Guru Shishya tradition, the classical Guru Shishya tradition, which I have found hugely problematic, because there we see that we're only given, it is only that our bodies are constantly being trained and trained and trained. And somewhere in the process, we forget about our own subjectivity, our own individual minds. They are just being shut up. And that is also very, hugely problematic way, because then today when we look at it, something is being fed into our bodies for so many years, and sometimes it's just difficult for us to question it. Sometimes we may be forgetting to question it because it is a part of our everyday existence, and as we say, it comes to our bodies naturally. And I would relate it to anything that we do on an everyday basis, like just walking around or doing something that we do every day. We don't actually put our minds to it, right? Because our bodies are so much used to doing it that sometimes we don't even realize what we are doing. And I think the same thing happens with the Guru Shishya tradition, that we are not given a critical outlook, we are not even trained to question our art practice, and hence sometimes it becomes extremely difficult. Sometimes we don't just have the enough vocabulary to speak it out, or let it out, even if we are finding discomforts, even if we know that our bodies are being depressed. And another way to look at it would be the aspect of fear. Uh, because there is a lack of criticism, the moment the student questions the art practice, there is also, as I said, a shutting up which is related to the questioning person. And hence, there is also a lot of fear aspect related, for the former practitioner to start questioning, to start making conversations. And then I also mean that there is a lack of vocabulary or grammar, even as, I know that I'm getting oppressed. It might also relate to, having other people around you to know that, okay, it is okay to question, and that is the way to move forward. Sometimes people don't even know that. And I would say that is actually a problem of the education system, the training methods that we're using, where only our bodies are trained, and in most of the times, in most of the occasions, the minds are being just asked to be silent all the time. And hence these conversations are very uncomfortable and might not be encouraged in a very traditional setting. Yeah.
That's a lot to think about, and definitely worth looking into if you are someone who's in the practice space. Personal experience alert, but I have personally been through this process myself, and I understand the fear aspect of it, because even I wasn't sure if I was allowed to question things, and if it was okay to think about certain things that were given at face value as being absolute. And told that this is how things are going to be, or this is how things are supposed to be. So yeah, I think thank you so much, first of all, for putting it out there for all of us to listen to and think about. But I think it's something that we have faced as a society. We've faced across all genres of teaching and learning. It's not just limited to dancing alone, but the idea of questioning has not necessarily been a part of our curriculum or lesson planning for a very long time. And a lot of experts in the field of education have also talked about why this is the case, and how the education system that was actually designed by the British back in the day to create people who could do clerical work without asking any questions seems to now become outdated in the sense that people now are looking outside, are looking for candidates who can actually question, who have the critical thinking skills. So I think it's just something that has been across in the education system, and I think it's just seeped into the dance space as well, which is very true. But I think it's time for us to sort of move on and try to find these ways of incorporating these newer ways and newer strategies of teaching methods that encourage students to ask questions, so the dance can propagate forward and not just remains in the way that it is built today, and it can sort of evolve with time. That's how arts has always been. It has always evolved with time, keeping in terms with what is happening in the outside world and responding to it while constantly trying to make way and creates an inclusive space for as many people as possible. You should never forget that arts is basically meant for that. So thank you so much for all of your insights, and thank you so much for putting it all out there in words that people can actually sort of respond to and think about in. On that note, we come to the end of our part 1 of the interview series. Thank you all for tuning into Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world. To continue receiving notifications on our latest episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel Natya Mandalam, or look us up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more information. I'm your host Niharika, and I'll see you all next time.